Welcome back to Tabletop Glory. My name is Graham Johnson, and today it's all about that base, specifically trash bases. Now, I know that the hobby is getting kind of expensive these days, and trying to save money where you can is important. So, I thought I'd take a look at some bases that are typically done with styrene and see if I can't try to do the same thing with wood, specifically coffee stir sticks, because they're pretty easy to find. Just go down to your local coffee shop or a Starbucks or whatever and grab 3 or 4 of them. They're going to be enough to get you through at least a squad worth of guys for kill team, and it's not going to be the end of the world as long as you get a drink while you're there. I'm sure nobody will mind. Now, I am going to head this one off at the pass. You are still going to see wood grain texture unless you just coat the whole thing in super glue, which isn't the most cost effective. You could use something like gesso if you have gesso, but that can make this project a little more expensive, and at that point you might as well be making this out of styrene. Now, that said, if you have styrene, you can go ahead and follow the exact same thing I'm going to be doing with the wood. It's pretty much the exact same thing. That all said, this was an experiment for me because I've never really tried to do the same thing with wood that I would with styrene, and I'm pretty pleasantly surprised at how it turned out. Now, that said, I did just kind of rough cut everything together because I was doing more of an experiment rather than doing something that I'm actually going to be using for miniatures. If I was going to actually be using this for miniatures, I would have taken a little bit more time to cut things out and smooth out some corners, so just keep that in mind that things look a little bit rough cut, but honestly I think they look great and I'm pretty pleased with them. Now, out of the 2 different style coffee stir sticks that I had available to me, I had one that was noticeably thicker and I had one that was noticeably thinner. Now, ultimately, I decided to go ahead and layer up my coffee stir sticks using the thinnest ones because I thought this would give me the most accurate scale. Now, that said, if you're going for more of a cartoonish, you might want to double up with 2 different sizes or double up with a thicker size or whatever. And I was also using this coffee stir stick as a way of gauging my scale. And what I mean by that is you can see me lining it up in 2 different places a lot of times, or using it to get my spacings for whatever I'm going to be adding. And this is just a really great way for me to make sure that everything stays uniform by using the same thicknesses, regardless of whether or not I'm measuring things. A lot of people call this finger scaling or finger gauging, and really whatever you call it, it does work. So I tend to use it often, especially on small stuff like this, where if they're slightly off over the course of an entire army, you're not gonna notice it too terribly much. Now, I am using super glue to glue all of this down. This is just for time's sake for me, but you could use PVA school glue if you want to. And what I'm just doing is I'm going to go ahead and layer up 2 layers, and then I'm going to hit it with some Zap Gap, which is just going to kind of lock that super glue in place so I can keep going. You're going to be able to cut the excess off using a pair of pliers, but if you are going to use pliers, I recommend using the back side of the jaws, as it's going to be a lot easier for cutting through this material. Ultimately, I use a Dremel, but that's just because it's a tool that I have available to me. Now, my ultimate goal was to try to replicate the types of sidewalks I see in my neighborhood, which is the kind that typically has a built-in gutter system to it. However, on the 3rd base, I wanted to kind of do more of a city style where the gutter goes down into the curb. And then I also put a grate on one of them just to kind of give it more of a little bit of a fantasy feel, depending upon what you're basing your miniatures. I just wanted to give you guys an example of some of the different ways that you can dress these up to make them unique. Ultimately, once I get them all painted, you can see they all really go well together regardless of the style, so just have fun and mix and match. Now, don't forget that these things are going to have expansion lines every so many feet, so maybe every 2 or 3 bases that you do, consider adding some kind of a joint. And I just carved that out using an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to exaggerate that line later with a marker so that you can see that a little bit better. But just be aware that when using an X-Acto knife, especially in the way that I'm using it, to be very slow and methodical so that you don't cut yourself. If you are worried about injuring yourself, you can buy chisel head X-Acto knives, and that will allow you to kind of keep your fingers a little bit farther away and make these more precise cuts without having to use the tip of an X-Acto knife. Here I am trying to prepare what is eventually going to be a gutter. I should have cut this out before I went ahead and glued everything down. Would have made my life a lot easier. So learn from my mistake, plan these things out in advance. I thought about this after I started working on the base, and it was something that I really wanted to add to kind of show the depth of which you can customize these despite them all just being basic roads. So I went ahead and decided that it was going to be the width of my chisel, because that made it easier for me to be able to remove it. But definitely would have made my life a lot easier to just cut it out with a pair of snips had I thought about it before I glued everything down. Here I'm just chopping down a really thin toothpick that I found in a box of toothpicks I had. And those are going to be my bars for the grating on top of the sewer entrance. One thing to keep in mind is if you really want this to have some depth, I would almost recommend cutting all the way through the base and cutting a hole into the base. And you could add some real serious depth so that no matter what the Mini sits on, it's always going to look deeper than what it is. In this case, just putting a little bit of black paint in there is more than enough for my liking. But if you were doing something for like a diorama or something, I would recommend actually cutting the hole underneath the grate to be significantly larger by cutting all the way through the base. Now once I got those bars in place, I went ahead and glued on the top of my curb to kind of lock everything in, to make it feel like the grit was part of the whole thing, to make it feel as one cohesive unit. That said, I should have waited a little bit longer before I went ahead and tried to glue this, because I used PVA on the bars and then I used super glue on everything else. And I don't know if you know this, but when you mix super glue and PVA, it does really weird things and it crumples up and does weird stuff. And it pulled one of my bars out of alignment, which is what you can see me fiddling there trying to fix. And I thought I fixed it, and I left it to dry, and I came back and it was all screwed up. So learn from my mistakes. If you're going to use PVA, make sure it is dry all the way before you use it. And I apologize for the out-of-camera focus work here, but I am prepping the bottom of the curb. So in order to do the more American inner city style type of curb where the sewer system goes down into and under the curb, I wanted to go ahead and hollow out the back side of my coffee stir stick about 25%. I don't go all the way to the back, and in fact I carve it at more of an angle. And the reason I do this is simply so that I can fill it in with some black paint later on and make it look like it goes down deep farther than what you can see. Now, I wasn't super happy with how squared off things looked, and I realized that I needed to try and curve off as well as slope down in this entrance to try to blend everything into the base a bit better, to make it look more like American suburban type of entrance for the sewer system. And ultimately I'm really happy with the final result that I got, because once the grit and the paint and everything got on there, it really helps everything to blend better. I realize looking back now that the road surface should be at the same height as this lower section of the curb, but I think that having that extra little edge of definition really kind of helps all of this to pop a little bit more. But also, if you wanted to post your miniatures with a foot up, like they're stepping up onto the curb, you're not gonna be able to get that pose to be quite as dynamic unless you have a higher curb. So keeping that in mind, you might want to make your curbs a little bit taller. In my case, I was more than happy to just leave them as they are. So as I've said before, I wanted to add a little bit of grit, and I'm hoping that this is going to help to make the city streets feel a little bit more like an urban warfare type environment. If you're doing something like maybe something like a Marvel superhero-y type of thing, then maybe you might want to leave your streets a little cleaner than what I'm doing. I'm not going like full zombie apocalypse, but I do want this to feel like it's in some kind of urban sprawl / urban combat type environment. But I'm also using this PVA glue as a way of filling any minor gaps that are in my woodwork. I did kind of lightly coat the wood in this, but it kind of just soaked in and didn't really help to hide the wood grain, which is why I said at the start of the video, I think you'd be better off coating the wood in super glue if you really wanted to hide the wood grain. Honestly though, I think my final result speaks for itself, and I don't think that step is needed, but you can absolutely do it if you want to. Moving on to the painting, I'm doing nothing particularly special. I basically coated everything in a gray, a neutral gray, and then I'm going in and I'm blocking in initially where the asphalt road is going to be and my deepest shadows that are inside of the sewer grates. And then I'm going in and doing a technique that I've done on rocks called leopard spotting, which is where you kind of wet blend two different washes together, or two or more washes together. In my case, I'm just using a black and a seraphim wash. If you're not familiar with seraphim, it's kind of a yellowy khaki type color. And I'm just mixing that on the concrete alone. And then I'm doing a minor wet blend of a green and black wash on the asphalt just to give it a bit of texture, and blotting it with a towel to reinforce that texture. Now the keen-eyed may have noticed that I didn't take my asphalt texture all the way into that rock texture that I added, so I went ahead and painted that using Scavenge Blight Dinge. This is a really great like browny muddy color that's really great for stuff like this. And it wet blended into the black so well, and after like multiple passes of both browns and blacks in these areas, the rocks really blend in. And with just a light stroking of a bone color that I went over it with, I don't even remember what bone color I used, but with a bone color, it really picks out all those rocks and really makes them pop. And then I went ahead, and as long as I had that bone color out, I went ahead and used that as my highlight for the edges of the concrete. And I kind of just did a straight edge highlight and then stippled over top of that to create a more jagged looking texture to kind of represent wear and tear and weathering and things like that. One last major detail that was needed, I went ahead and used this kebab skewer as just a way of kind of finger gauging and keeping all my lines consistent, but the line work on the side of the road, the bright yellow line or the hash line or the white line or whatever it is that you use in your country. In my country it happens to be yellow line 9 times out of 10. But I'm just going to go ahead and anywhere where it's not perfect, I'm going to go back over it again with a bit of black just to make it look like the line's beat up and old. But we're going ahead and doing this white first because it's really going to help the yellow to pop. If I put yellow straight on black, it'll be muddy and I'll have to do a ton of coats. But by using this bone color from earlier, I only have to do one pass with the bone color and then put yellow on top of it, and it absolutely pops. Now the mixture of yellow I am using is the Liquitex mixed with a little bit of Averland Sunset. I think that gives you this really nice, beautiful yellow-orange, this sunset-y color that really, as far as I can tell, is a near color match for American roads. So that's what I decided to go with. You can use my formula or you can come up with your own. And here we are with the final results, starting out with the simplest, which I pretty much like. I'm not really sure why the asphalt turned out as glossy as it is. I've put a couple of coats of matte coat on and it's just not dulling down, so I think I'm gonna have to try a different brand of matte coat, but honestly, really like it. Switching off to the second one, it's kind of a repeat of the first, so I went ahead and dolled it up with a fake newspaper and a little grass tuft growing out of the crack in the concrete. And last but not least, since I did a more American suburbia style, I decided to go ahead and add an IT balloon. Well, that's going to wrap things up for today. Hopefully you guys found this at least entertaining, if not somewhat educational. And I had a lot of fun making these, and hopefully I've inspired you guys to make some of your own. In any case, may your display case always be filled and your pile of shame never run empty. Until next time.